Bullets tear across the battlefield. State capitals are on fire. Forces from the south surge forward, clashing with enemies in the north. But this isn't 1865, this is today, and America is tearing itself apart. 50 states, 50 armies. So what would actually happen if every US state went to war with each other? It's the height of summer along Interstate 40, somewhere near the Texas-Oklahoma border. A convoy of Texas National Guard vehicles rolls toward Amarillo, hauling crude oil from the Permian Basin. It should be a routine journey, but this time they don't make it. Oklahoma militiamen claiming sovereignty over what used to be a federal highway have planted improvised explosives across 3 miles of asphalt. 17 Texas guardsmen are dead before the sun sets. The oil burns for 3 days, visible from space. And just like that, America's second Civil War begins. Forget everything you think you know about what might happen if America turned inward on itself. A full-scale government collapse has left complete constitutional anarchy in its wake. Across the country, governors wake and realize there is no president, no Congress, no Supreme Court, and no one to stop them from declaring independence from the Republic. Across the country, the same picture unfolds. Within 6 hours of the Texas border clash, every state activates its National Guard. These aren't weekend warriors playing soldier. With a true sense of purpose emerging, armories crack open and engines roar to life. The National Guard becomes every governor's personal army, with Abrams tanks rumbling out of factories in Texas, Blackhawks flying over California, and Humvees rolling across Ohio. And now they're about to be unleashed to do the job they never dreamed of. California fields about 24,000 National Guardsmen, backed by Marines and sailors from San Diego. Texas matches it with nearly 20,000 guardsmen and 2 armored divisions at Fort Cavazos and Bliss. New York, Florida, and Virginia bring fighter wings, naval fleets, and special forces once meant for foreign wars. Smaller states field lighter battalions, but everyone suddenly begins counting its stockpiles of artillery, drones, and ammunition, once vaguely earmarked for emergencies. The chain of command collapses upward. What used to be one military power is now 50 competing generals with their own flags, orders, and no higher authority left to obey. The total strength of all National Guard units combined comes to over 443,000 soldiers, sailors, and airmen. That's over 4 times larger than the entire British Army. It's more than double the size of the German Bundeswehr. And now they're no longer taking orders from Washington, because Washington doesn't exist anymore. In the hours after the Texas-Oklahoma border clash, chaos spreads faster than any army. Texas accuses Oklahoma of terrorism and moves troops north, while Oklahoma declares it an act of defense and appeals for allies. The governors of Louisiana, Arkansas, Kansas, and New Mexico all mobilize their guards preemptively, fearing the violence will spill across the borders. Federal emergency lines go unanswered. NORAD, FEMA, and the National Guard Bureau are silent. Rumors flash all across social media that the president is dead, the vice president has fled, and the Pentagon has been hit by sabotage. In the vacuum, every governor assumes the worst. They are absolutely and utterly alone. Sure, it's absurd, but a single firefight on I-40 has suddenly become the spark for a nationwide chain reaction. 50 independent militaries, each convinced the others are hostile, all acting on fear before facts catch up. The National Guard is the backbone of armored resistance everywhere. They're backed by state police and highway patrol, suddenly promoted from traffic control to border patrol. Port authorities and State Department of Transports lock gates, post barricades, and seize way stations as ad hoc checkpoints. Where they exist, state defense forces are activated to guard dams, hospitals, and 911 centers so the Guard can maneuver. Command is personal. The adjutant general becomes the state field marshal. County sheriffs and city emergency managers are folded into a single incident command chart taped to the EOC wall. Curfews, fuel rationing, and movement restrictions are published within hours. It gets real fast before anyone has a clue of what's even happening. These armed professionals are in for the ride of their lives because they're about to be operating on the world's most armed battlefield. Americans own more than 393 million firearms, or half of the global total for civilian-owned small arms. That's about 120 guns for every 100 people. More than Yemen, more than Serbia, more than any nation in human history. 42% of American households have at least one gun. In Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska, that number exceeds 70%. The state governors knew that they'd have no difficulty in creating armed militias if citizen freedom is on the line. Volunteers were already getting the "Don't Tread on Me" patches ready when it dawned on them that they were actually about to wade into the largest armed insurrection in world history. With millions of AR-15s, hunting rifles and handguns suddenly choosing sides. Every Cabela's becomes an armory, every gun show becomes a recruitment center, and every suburban dad with a weapons collection suddenly becomes a potential combatant. The first strategic fight is for information. State Chief Information Officers, or CIOs, wall off networks as governors claim control of state fusion centers and demand live feeds from traffic cams, port cranes, and grid operators. Economics crater on contact as banks lock doors to avoid runs and card networks throttle. Within hours, the only prices that matter are for diesel, potable water, and calories. Everyone asks about nukes. The short, chilling answer is that they are present but unusable. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBM fields in Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming, ballistic missile subs at sea, and nuclear bomb wings sit behind federal custody systems with two-man rules, permissive action links, and a national command network that is now fractured. Sure, the states can posture, ring bases with troops, even cut commercial power, but they cannot authenticate a launch. The weapons deter rash assaults on those bases, and little else. The explosions on I-40 are still burning. When the chain reaction begins, every state capital becomes a war room. By day 2, mobilization is in full effect as fear sweeps across the country unchecked. The Mississippi River becomes one of the conflict's first front lines when Arkansas seizes the I-40 bridge at Memphis, claiming it's preventing Texan oil shipments from contaminating the river. Tennessee retaliates. Snipers trade fire from both sides of the bridge deck as the Memphis skyline glows red and fuel barges ignite. The battle leaves 47 dead, hundreds wounded, and millions confused. Farther south, Louisiana declares the entire Mississippi a state waterway. Illinois responds in kind with artillery from the riverbank near Cairo. Barges carrying Midwestern grain toward the Gulf explode under drone strikes. No one even knows from which side. What began as a supply and sovereignty dispute turns into the battle for the river, the first multi-state engagement of this new, horrific war. On the West Coast, California locks itself down like a fortress. The governor orders the National Guard to secure I-5 north and south, establishing checkpoints at the Oregon border. Oregon protests naturally. Truckers trying to deliver wheat from eastern Washington are turned back. When a convoy refuses an order to halt near Redding, California, Guard units open fire, leaving 5 semis and their drivers in a mass of twisted burning metal. That night, Oregon mobilizes 6,000 guardsmen and moves armored vehicles to Klamath Falls. Seattle and Portland go on curfew. Meanwhile, California's governor goes live on statewide broadcast to declare that no supplies, water, or food will cross into the state without oversight. To the north, that sounds like an embargo. To Californians, it sounds like survival. Within 72 hours, the Pacific Coast fractures into two realities. A zealous and heavily militarized California holds its border like a national frontier, and a wary Oregon-Washington alliance forms in self-defense. This is the embryo of what will become the Pacific Republic, a bloc born not from ambition, but sheer panic. Back east, the collapse takes on a different accent. When Washington, D.C. suddenly goes dark, Virginia's adjutant general takes control of Fort Belvoir and the Pentagon complex, declaring temporary custodianship of federal assets. Maryland calls it theft. They send in a column of guard vehicles up I-95 to confront the Virginians. The Virginians are all too willing to escalate, scrambling A-10s from Roanoke. The two forces meet at Woodrow Wilson Bridge just south of the Capitol. The standoff is poised on a knife's edge. Suddenly, an errant anti-tank guided missile, or ATGM, hits a fuel truck and the blast kills 60 on both sides. No one knows who shot first, and no one cares. Firefights ignite across the bridge and surrounding countryside. The smoke rising over the Potomac for the first time since the First Civil War becomes a symbol of the federal government's undeniable collapse. Pennsylvania isn't one to sit around and wait for someone to tell it what to do. Hearing of the imminent war between Maryland and Virginia, its governor orders its guard units to seize the Norfolk Southern rail hubs that feed fuel eastward. West Virginia, coal-rich but utterly surrounded by mountains and wary neighbors, shockingly refuses transit rights. Within days, Pennsylvanian armor crosses the border to, quote, secure energy access, and West Virginia's 6,000 guardsmen can do nothing to stop them. The invasion lasts 2 days. Morgantown burns, coal convoys thunder east under Pennsylvania escort. Appalachia becomes a corridor of wrecked trains, black smoke, and shattered loyalties. In the heartland, everyone is hungry before the shooting even reaches them. Iowa's silos hold 2.4 billion bushels of corn, Illinois another 2.3 billion, and Nebraska has about 1.5 billion more. Every neighboring state knows this, and so does everyone beyond the Mississippi. When Chicago's food distribution system collapses on day 4, its governor is forced to deploy guard troops to protect rail lines. Missouri does the same across the river. At the bridge town of Quincy, a convoy of Missouri guardsmen try to cross with grain trucks. When Illinois troops open fire, 15 die as grain spills out onto the asphalt and burns. Kansas, armed but anxious, closes I-70 and the interstate leading to Topeka, citing biosecurity concerns. It's really a front for a blockade that'll keep refugees out, now pouring into America's highways and byways by the millions. By the end of the week, Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, and Illinois are all manning roadblocks against each other. Midwest farmers start hiding their harvests in machine sheds and barn lofts. The breadbasket of America has now turned into a patchwork of armed silos. Meanwhile, up in America's polite attic, a handful of states watch the apocalypse unfold with Midwestern bewilderment. Wisconsin issues a sternly worded statement about valuing neighborly dialogue. Minnesota mobilizes the National Guard. North Dakota's governor declares martial law. South Dakota watches events unfold. Back in the South, things are very real and heating up along the Texas-Oklahoma border. That clash might have been the match, but access to the Gulf Coast oil belt is the true firestorm. Texas Guard divisions fortify the Houston Ship Channel, knowing it's the lifeline for 40% of the nation's refining capacity. Louisiana's governor panics in turn. Without refinery access, New Orleans runs dry in just a few days. When Louisiana troops occupy Port Fourchon and the mouth of the Mississippi, threatening to choke Texas exports, Texas responds with its "Don't mess with me" air power. F-16s from the 149th Fighter Wing streak east, dropping precision bombs on a Louisiana fuel depot outside Lake Charles. 2 refineries go up in flames as a toxic plume rolls across the bayou. 1,000 civilians die in the inferno. The Gulf itself becomes the scene of the war's first true naval brawl. Offshore rigs are commandeered as floating fortresses, crewed by oil workers turned soldiers. Mississippi's fishing fleets get repurposed as patrol boats. By week's end, the coastline from Galveston to Pensacola is a blackened no man's land. Images of burning rigs, grounded tankers, and oil slicks stretching 100 miles pepper onlookers' social media feeds, which document the chaos in full. As the smoke settles on the war's first week, every region defaults to its old instincts. Texans swagger into command, convinced that decisive action beats hesitation. Californians centralize, turning crises into spreadsheets and command centers, while preaching sustainability amid the ruins. Midwesterners hunker down, quietly keeping the food moving and their neighbors fed. New Englanders draft compacts and moral declarations. Southerners rally around churches and sheriffs, and the mountain states just lock the gates and wait it out. Interestingly, culture hardens into strategy, and those instincts start drawing the borders that will soon become the new nations. 3 days later, this coalescing pattern is unmistakable. The Pacific states realize isolation will kill them faster than war. So California, Oregon, and Washington open emergency talks. They officially broaden the Pacific Republic to encompass the entire West Coast, pooling resources and promising shared defense west of the Rockies. Not one to be left out, Texas bullies its neighbors into a loose coalition as Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico sign mutual aid pacts in exchange for oil, grain, and fuel. The first Southern Energy Compact meeting happens in a Houston boardroom lit by generators. The Northeast Corridor coalesces around the surviving transport spine from D.C. to Boston. Finance, shipping, and pharmaceuticals now fly under one flag. They all call themselves the Union of Atlantic States, but everyone else just calls them the Corridor. The Midwest becomes the breadbasket bloc, joined by shared necessity rather than ideology. Governors of Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, and Ohio declare a free agricultural trade zone, guarded by armed convoys on the interstates. And in the high country, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho all sign nothing at all. They don't need to, the mountains are their treaty. By the end of the second week, the United States has gone from complete collapse to congealing into 5 embryonic nations, each convinced the others are the aggressors. By the end of the first month, the map looks like spilled paint. The Pacific Republic stretches from San Diego to Seattle. The Texas coalition dominates the center, a rough triangle of oil, grain, and swagger. The front lines harden around the Mississippi River, the Sierra Nevada, and the Appalachians, each carved into armed zones. Power grids become isolated and airspace is constantly contested. But the fighting hasn't stopped. The chaos has finally become organized. California's dream of feeding itself dies with the first dry season. The Central Valley, once the grocery store of America, wilts without Colorado River water. Desperate, the Pacific Republic launches Operation Green Horizon, an ambitious push east through Nevada and into Arizona to seize irrigation channels and the Hoover Dam. This is one of the first documented wars of hydration. The offensive begins at dawn. California Guard convoys storm through the Mojave, solar panels glinting, diesel trucks overloaded with troops and homemade drones. Arizona's defenders are dug in behind ridgelines, armed with anti-tank missiles salvaged from Air Force depots. When the Californians hit the first choke point on US 93, the desert erupts. 3 hours later, the highway is littered with burning vehicles and bodies half buried in red dust. The offensive grinds to a halt, despite the half-hearted resistance. Arizona's governor live streams a victory speech from a gas station parking lot, standing on a stack of bottled water. 2 days later, he signs a treaty with Texas. The Colorado River now flows under the Lone Star flag. Back east, the Northeast Corridor teeters. Its lifelines, diesel, food, and medicine are fraying. The port of Norfolk, Virginia is the last major naval base on the Atlantic capable of deep-water operations. It also happens to be sitting halfway between two coalitions that both think they own it. The Texas-aligned Virginia government demands the fleet surrender. The Northeast refuses. Then the sailors make their own choice, deciding to barricade the base and declare themselves neutral, flying the old American flag over the docks. For a brief, strange week, Norfolk becomes a floating republic with a handful of ships, a few thousand sailors, and a vow of strict neutrality. That vow lasts exactly until payday. Predictable, right? When the fuel, food, and money run out, the sailors auction off half of the destroyers for crude oil. The rest defect to Texas. By the time the smoke clears, the Atlantic Fleet is now the Gulf Fleet, and the Northeast has lost its screen of warships at last. While Texas consolidated power across the Gulf, Florida was busy staging a civil war within a war. At first, Florida's independence goes surprisingly well. They've got ports, tourism cash reserves, and MacDill Air Force Base with all of its command infrastructure. But then, the Florida Men Militia took shape, a 1,000-strong coalition of off-duty deputies, ex-Marines, and barefoot patriots armed with golf carts, beer, and an unshakable belief in destiny. Their first heroic act of self-defense is to commandeer Disney World as a fortress, declaring it the Free Kingdom of Orlando. Rides are free for a week, only the public is too scared to leave their homes. The second order of business is to try to launch another amphibious assault on Cuba, to liberate it before Texas does. They never make it past the Keys. Most of their airboats run out of gas. One group accidentally invades the wrong island and briefly occupies a sandals resort. Texas couldn't have asked for a better distraction. While Florida men live-stream their misadventures, the Texas coalition seizes Port Tampa Bay, cutting off Florida's fuel imports. 2 weeks later, the Sunshine State surrenders from sheer entropy and exhaustion. For months, the Great Lakes Confederation does a fantastic job staying neutral. They sell grain to everyone at fair prices, and nobody wants to bite the hand that feeds them cheese. But neutrality in wartime is just another way of saying future target. When Texas starts buying Iowa's corn at premium prices, the Pacific Republic panics. California can't grow lettuce anymore, let alone corn. In year 2, the Pacific sends a desperate trade mission through the mountain territories hoping to broker a deal with the Midwest. But neutrality has its limits. When the California convoy reaches Nebraska, it's ambushed by local farmers, of all things. Word had spread that the Californians were paying in cryptocurrency and environmental credits. The Nebraskans want diesel, not digital. The convoy is stripped bare, its escorts humiliated. The entire mission collapses in a haze of bad blood. California's food crisis goes from critical to catastrophic. By autumn, the corn war becomes the silent killer of the Pacific Bloc. 40% of its population subsists on rations. Tech workers are trading video cards for grain sacks. For all its industry and wealth, California is starving, and Texas knows it. By year 3, intermittent chaos ossifies into routine. Trade caravans move under military escort under constant drone surveillance. New borders replace old ones, and pirate radio stations serve as the national news. The Great Lakes and the Mountain Territories become the only regions where trains still run on schedule. Everywhere else runs on fear. Texas's coalition now encompasses 14 states, a reality beyond many Texans' wildest dreams. The Lone Star Empire now extends from Louisiana's swamps to Arizona's deserts. Empire, though, is really just a loose word for a supply chain with an army. In the Lone Star Empire, gasoline is king. Barrels of oil are stamped with the Texas Star and escorted north in armored convoys. Even the Northeast buys from them now, paying in antibiotics and synthetic insulin. The Pacific Republic still holds together, barely, and mostly out of spite for everything Texas and its vassals stand for. The ports hum with cautious trade with Asia, but the Central Valley is a dust bowl. Oregon and Washington mutter about secession from the secession. California's capital moves inland to Sacramento after wildfires destroy Los Angeles. It's less a nation now and more of a network of city-states bound by desperation and desalination plants. Through it all, the mountain territories stay quiet and rich. Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana turn coal, gas, and fertilizer into fortunes. Their mountain passes become toll gates. Every convoy crossing the Rockies pays in gold or goods. None of these states' troops have fired a shot in a year. They don't need to. Geography fights for them. By the start of year 4, satellites, at least those still working, show the new America clearly. From space, the continent glows unevenly. Texas burns bright, its refineries still alive. California is dark except for a coastal strip of urban commotion. The Northeast is a scatter of pinpricks along the coast. The Great Lakes shimmer faintly with industry. The Rockies are pitch black, hidden under winter and silence. The war's final flashpoints arise through exhaustion. In Louisiana, a pipeline explosion near Baton Rouge ignites half of the bayou, killing 2,000 and crippling Texas's fuel exports for months. In California, drought gives way to unfettered famine, and the government begins forced migrations toward the coast. In the Northeast, winter kills 500,000 people as power grids freeze and diesel runs out. The Great Lakes Confederation opens its borders to refugees, until cholera arrives and they shut them again. Even the mountain territories feel the strain. Colorado's toll convoys are hit by bandits disguised as charity workers. Montana's coal trains derail in sabotage attacks. Isolationism has its limits when everyone is starving. By the war's 5th year, the survivors have had enough. The Texas Empire stabilizes the continent by default, not design. Its oil keeps the generators humming from Chicago to Boston. Its soldiers patrol trade routes that no one else could afford to defend. When foreign envoys finally return, they all land in Houston. There is no Washington anymore. In the end, the state's animosity toward each other simply stops mattering. Most of the old governors who started the conflict are now either dead, assassinated, or replaced by a new wave of younger and eager leadership. The Pacific Republic signs a trade deal with China. The Great Lakes Confederation partners with Canada on water rights. The Northeast Union rebrands itself as the Atlantic States and tries in vain to join the European Union. Texas, ever mindful of its reputation, drops the word coalition altogether and simply calls itself the Republic of Texas again. In the South, the Florida Men Militia, or what's left of it at least, stages one last act of courageous defiance. They hijack a cruise ship in Miami and declare it Florida at sea, and set sail for the Caribbean, broadcasting country music and conspiracy theories until the signal fades forever. The old America is gone, but its sense of humor survives. A modern civil war would be chaos, but what if the first one had ended differently? Watch USA Today if the South won the Civil War to see how that alternate America might look today, or click on this video instead.